I'll begin with the prayer, and it's what I refer to as a standard parliamentary prayer. Lord, the God of all righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and her government, to members of Parliament and all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the nation wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideals, but laying aside all private interests and prejudices, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all mankind. So may your kingdom come and your name be hallowed. Amen. Please be seated.
Confirmation of minutes.
Mr. Speaker, with your leave, considering the interaction I had today with members of Parliament, and which was communicated to you, I would urge that we waive the confirmation of minutes in order that we may proceed with the most important and urgent business of the Parliament. May it please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. So we will defer the minutes that were circulated until a subsequent sitting. Next item, please.
Messages from the Governor General.
There are no messages from the Governor General.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have two announcements to make. I would begin first by reading into the records of this Honorable House a press release that was issued by Government House yesterday. It reads, by letter dated 16 March 2020, His Excellency the Governor General, so S.W. Tapley Seaton, GCMG CVO QC JP LLD, wrote to the three representatives of the opposition in the National Assembly, namely the Honorable Patrice Nisbet, MNA, JP, the Honorable Marcella Liebert, MNA, JP, and the Honorable Conris Maynard, MNA, as follows. Dear Honorable Members, appointment of a leader of the opposition. The judgment of the Court of Appeal of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court of 12th March 2020 required the former member for constituency number 6 to vacate his seat in the National Assembly. By this letter, I invite you, in accordance with the provisions of Section 58 of the Constitution of St. Christopher and Nevis, to inform me in writing of the member of the opposition commanding the support of one other representative so that I can appoint a leader of the opposition. I would be grateful to receive your reply at the earliest. A letter dated 15th April 2020 was received by the Office of the Governor General. The said letter was signed by the three representatives and is as follows. Dear Governor General, Section 26(1) of the Constitution requires that the National Assembly shall consist of a such number of representatives as corresponds with the number of constituencies for the time being established in accordance with section 50. At present, the National Assembly is at variance with this provision. Consequently, in our view, it would be premature for an appointment of the Leader of Opposition at this time, while there is any number of vacant seats in our National Assembly, only to have to revisit and appoint upon the election of a representative for constituency number 6 in a matter of weeks. We expect that the government will make arrangements as soon as possible to align the National Assembly with section 26(1), and as such, we will await the election of a representative for constituency number 6 before giving support to any member to be appointed as Leader of the Opposition. End of press release from Government House, St. Kitts, April 16, 2020. My second announcement is basically to indicate events leading up to why we're here for this emergency sit-in. I would have instructed the Clerk of the House to issue a notice for this sit-in in accordance with section 3.3 of our standing orders, whereby a notice can be given at short notice, less than 7 clear days. That notice would have been issued on Wednesday a.m. That would have been the 15th. I would have followed up that notice with a bit of correspondence to all members just late yesterday to indicate a number of things, including the fact that the executive would have contacted me on Wednesday morning and would have discussed with me the need to have this emergency sit-in. And basically, it had to do with the fact that upon receiving advice, that is the cabinet, from the medical experts and the National COVID Task Force team, that it has become necessary, based on a recommendation from the advisors, for there to be an extension to the state of emergency. Having had that discussion with the executive and having then being called upon to make that decision as to whether it warrants an emergency sit-in, I saw it fit to so do in accordance with section 3.3 of the standing orders. I would have communicated to all members, and I should indicate that this notice went out by email given the circumstances, and I would have indicated to the members that we will not have anyone in the gallery, any strangers, any guests in the gallery, in observance of the regulations that subsist with respect to the state of the emergency. And so we have tried our best to, at this time, to be exercising the social distancing, physical distancing within the Parliament. And so, thus, the reasons for our being here. I just wanted to indicate such, and we will move to the next item. I think though I should, Honorable Leader of Government Business, I know you had asked for the confirmation of minutes to be deferred, but I would ask also that you move a motion that we adopt this order paper as circulated, to make sure we're in good order.
Mr. Speaker, I so move.
Yes. So the question is, the order paper as circulated just this morning, be accepted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I have been advised that the Honorable Nigel Carty will be absent from this sitting. Next item.
Presentation of papers and reports from committees, petitions, government notices, unofficial notices, questions, request for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, motions relating to the business of the National Assembly and moved by a minister, motions, resolutions,
Mr. Speaker, so I rise with your leave, and on this occasion it is to present an important resolution to do with the matter of the COVID-19. It is indeed, Mr. Speaker, a momentous time, not just in the life of our Parliament and our country, but it is a momentous occasion.
Honorable Member, 1 second, please. I'm sorry. Good. 1 second. Okay, there's been some discussion as about the time period that would be allowed for speaking on this resolution.
Mr.
So
Speaker.
I call on the Leader of the Opposition,
Mr. Speaker.
Business to move a motion with respect to that.
Mr. Speaker, as earlier represented to you in your office, I have had occasion to speak to all members of the House, including members of the opposition, and we have agreed that other than the move of the bill, that all members will try and restrict their time to 1/2 hour, no more than half an hour. There may be a couple of minutes for wrapping up, but the mover is at liberty.
Okay. So the,
I move the motion.
Thank you.
If you need a motion.
yes, the question is,
We were not told accept the mover of any resolution. Just want to verify what was told to us. We were asked if we would agree that every member presenting on the resolution would speak for half an hour. Now, the Leader of Government Business has risen and said every member except a mover of the resolution. That is not what our discussion was.
so we will not, I will not put the question then. We proceed as per usual.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that the honourable member has raised a point, and I am not sure that I have the authority to restrict the leader of the opposition, the leader of the motion, the mover of the motion, to time, because in a motion, this is an important motion which has to be expressed to the public. But all of us have agreed, have spoken, to a half an hour. And so I would not restrict the move of the motion to half an hour. If the member is not happy with that, then I suppose we'll have to move on without any restrictions. But as far as I'm concerned, a half an hour is reasonable time.
Okay, I am satisfied that this takes the form of a motion, and the motion is that, or the question is that for this particular resolution, that all members will be limited to 1/2 an hour speaking with a few minutes, let's say 5 minutes, I'll say 5 minutes extra time if so needed, except the mover of the resolution. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? No. Clearly the ayes have it. Let's continue, please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I rise on this occasion, Mr. Speaker, to present the resolution before the National Assembly. And I was making the point, Mr. Speaker, that this is a very momentous time in the annals of the Parliament of St. Kitts and Nevis, in the life of our own country, and certainly to the world at large. What has brought us here is an invisible organism that has been dubbed the coronavirus disease, Mr. Speaker, and it has its origin all the way in Wuhan, China, and was first identified as a world emergency, health emergency, and latterly on March 11 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization. Everywhere, Mr. Speaker, we look at the news, at home, in the region and beyond. It is quite clear that COVID-19 represents a real and present danger to humanity. It certainly has destabilized the global community, overwhelmed the capacity of health systems everywhere, in particular in the USA, in the United Kingdom, and Europe generally. It has been brutal in its health and economic impact. Mr. Speaker, as at yesterday, 3 p.m., April 16th, there were reported 1,995,983 confirmed cases of COVID-19 worldwide. And of that number of confirmed cases, there were 131,037 deaths. How brutal has this pandemic been? By this morning, the number of confirmed cases had risen, and we had reports of over 2 million confirmed cases worldwide, and 145,000 plus persons had died as a result of this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, it is a matter of great regret that at this time there is no therapy or vaccine to treat those infected with COVID-19. To control this virus, our strategy in St. Kitts and Nevis has been to reduce the intensity of the outbreak and to slow down the increase in the number of cases as much as possible. To accomplish this, we engage in early identification of cases, isolation, and appropriate management of the cases, and an aggressive contact tracing and quarantining of contacts of such cases. The ultimate goal of this suppression strategy is the interruption of the transmission of the virus. Mr. Speaker, each of us has an important role to play in protecting ourselves and others from this disease. The health professionals, our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hazel Laws, in particular, who heads the Health Emergency Operations Center, has outlined some simple tips consistent with the guidelines of the WHO and PAHO. 1, we have to continue to practice social distancing. The ultimate touchy forms of greeting, which we in the Caribbean have long been acculturated to, such as the hugs and the handshakes, at least for these times, we should do them no more. Whereas before, we showed love and affection by physical closeness or touch, in this new season of COVID-19, a new reality has emerged. We are in different times, Mr. Speaker. New modes of engagement are required. And it would appear for such time as COVID-19 is with us, distance will be the best way to express our caring and affection for one another. And that is why, as part of our strategy and advice from the health professional, we undertook to encourage our citizens and residents to avoid visits to our senior citizens at their homes and at their facilities which cater for them, at our prisons, at our hospitals, etc. And even now we still want to encourage that the young people should stay away from the elderly to protect them all from the transmission of the dreaded virus. We are encouraged to wear masks in public spaces, and we understand for some this will take some time, but we want people to catch up with the new mode and the new fashion, if you will, urgently and quickly. This is very important. For this, by doing this, we can help to minimize the transmission. We encourage each one to boost his or her immune system, eat well, sleep well, exercise daily, and we encourage everyone to engage in effective hand-washing practices and indeed other forms of sanitary practices like cleaning frequently used spaces with disinfectants, alcohol, etc. Mr. Speaker, as simple and empowering as those requirements are, in the public interest, we need to enforce them with law. We walk around communities, and still there are some people who do not appreciate that there's a new norm, there's a new standard of behavior, and those new standards require us to keep the 6 feet distance to the extent practicable. Those new standards require us, once we are out in public, to wear our masks, as difficult as it may be. And certainly, there are different types of masks available. The masks or the protective gear don't have to be the most expensive one. Certainly, there are different forms. A piece of cloth, clean one, can suffice because some article that covers the nose or the mouth is better than nothing. And so we want to encourage the discipline of consistency in the wearing of the mask. Mr. Speaker, for the last 20 days or so, we have utilized the Emergency Powers Act and the Emergency Powers COVID-19 regulations to ensure best practices and to protect our people. We have had, for example, to look at the overcrowding in our public transport system and to restrict and regulate the number of persons who could be, for example, in a passenger bus. Difficult as that has been. Difficult for passengers requiring to move. Difficult for bus operators who need a minimum number to be able to make a reasonable living from that particular engagement in trade. we have had to come to this decision because lives matter more. And so for this season, we have had to significantly reduce the number of passengers. Going forward, we will revisit all of these measures as we move in a different time. As we realize the best practices elsewhere, we have to come back and revisit. We cannot allow, Mr. Speaker, even one individual's indifference, their disbelief in the science, their lack of good judgment and good sense to cause pain and suffering and even death to those of us who are heeding the advice and implementing them. The Emergency Powers Act has been a powerful resource available to us to stem the tide of the virus. We have heard persons say that the virus doesn't move really. It is people who do. And as people move from place to place, the risk of transmission gets even greater. And that is why you would see everywhere around the world the so-called call and implementation of shutdown that keeps people in their shelter. And the fundamental presumption between all of the regulations, from I think regulation number 7, which we started with, to regulation we are now 12, has been the assumption that persons who are not required for essential services, persons who do not have a compelling reason to leave their home, will stay at home. Stay at home, including your yard, because it is the safest place, not just for you, but for the rest of the community. And that is why the shelter in place has remained a critical part of the success and reduction of the transmission of the disease. We need the Emergency Powers Act, as has every country everywhere. The BVI, a territory, Anguilla, every one of them, Montserrat, Antigua, an independent country, Grenada, Jamaica, and Trinidad. Everyone has had to resort to some application of emergency powers, including curfew, to help stem the tide of the transmission. So, Mr. Speaker, we need these if we are going to keep our people safe. And so the emergency powers regulations, they will continue to be in place as long as possible to protect each of us from the virus and to prevent the overwhelming of our health systems and, of course, the consequential loss of lives. That has been the experience in the developing countries, whether it is Italy or the United Kingdom or the US of A. The health system could not cope. An absence of bed, an absence of manpower, an absence of protective equipment everywhere. And once that happens, then people cannot get the care that they require, and they cannot get it in time. And the ultimate negative consequences is that more people perhaps would die than was needed to have the appropriate system being in place. And so, Mr. Speaker, to cut the story short, this is the single reason why we have come to Parliament today. We have come to Parliament to have the legislative backing of the Parliament to continue to protect our people from a pandemic that is still waging a most aggressive onslaught on mankind, destabilizing our communities, our societies and countries, and leaving a wake of death in its path. The pandemic has reminded us that no man is an island. We need each other to do the right thing. We can, each of us, protect each other by working together, doing the right thing. Today, we are expecting that the National Assembly will do the right thing for the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, that the National Assembly will rise beyond the partisanship to look at the national trust, the national development, the national health, the lives of our people, and we will, in one accord, give support to the resolution. Mr. Speaker, the director of the Pan American Health Organization, Dr. Clarice Etienne, recently advised our region to prepare for the worst. And it was just a few days that Dr. Etienne was speaking to an audience. Indeed, she was speaking in Washington, D.C. on the 14th of April. And she predicted that the next 2 weeks will be very difficult ones for us in the hemisphere. We therefore cannot afford to face an uncertain future with less tools, such as the Emergency Powers Act and relevant regulations, which are critical if we are to consolidate the gains. Dr. Etienne made the point, for example, that COVID-19 has yet to hit with full force in our region, particularly, she said, in Latin America and the Caribbean. We can expect it to intensify in the next few weeks. Indeed, the rise in hospitalization and deaths we see in some countries highlights how quickly the situation could change in others. End of quote. What she is saying, even though the Caribbean for now, and it is listed as a high-risk region, may not have a large number of deaths, within a few weeks, the situation could change. And so she continues to warn that we have to prepare for the worst and that it is not yet over, even as we begin efforts to relax some of the measures. She advised that caution, and there has to be an agility and nimbleness of the state to respond with respect to this coronavirus, because ultimately lives are at stake. The resolution, Mr. Speaker, reads thus: whereas by virtue of the provisions of Section 19 of the St. Christopher and Nevis 1983 Constitution Order, the Governor General may, by proclamation, declare that a state of emergency exists in St. Christopher and Nevis for the purposes of Chapter 2 of the Constitution, and whereas by virtue of Proclamation Number 6 of 2020, dated the 28th of March, 2020, the Governor General declared a state of emergency for St. Christopher and Nevis for the period 28 March 2020 until the 11th April 2020 on the ground of the threat of a natural calamity of the COVID-19 virus, an infectious disease which has taken effect on a pandemic scale and which threatened the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And whereas the said state of emergency was extended until Saturday, which is tomorrow, the 18th of April 2020, by Proclamation Number 11 of 2020, dated the 7th day of April 2020. And whereas Section 19, subsection 3 of the St. Christopher and Nevis Constitution 1983 order provides that a declaration of emergency shall lapse at the expiration of a period of 21 days, beginning the date of the publication of the declaration. And whereas, pursuant to Section 19 of the St. Kitts and Nevis 1983 Constitution Order, a declaration of emergency may be extended by the resolution of the National Assembly up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified therein. And whereas, pursuant to Section 19, subsection 8 of the St. Christopher Nevis 1983 Constitution Order, a resolution of the National Assembly for the purposes of subsection 3 shall not be passed in the National Assembly unless it is supported by the votes of not less than 2/3 of all the representatives and senators. And whereas the COVID-19 virus continues to pose a significant threat of a natural calamity and the scale of a public health emergency to the Federation of St. Christopher Nevis, and it is therefore necessary to extend the state of emergency up to a period of 12 months or such short a period as may be specified. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the National Assembly that it is necessary to extend the state of emergency up to a period of 12 months or such short a period as may be specified to take effect on the 18th day of April 2020, that would be to combat the threat of the COVID-19 virus for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. That is the resolution that is put before the House, Mr. Speaker, consistent with the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution provides for a period of 12 months or shorter, and that phraseology is embodied in the resolution. We do not know how long this pandemic will be with us. We are, of course, optimistic that the hard work that has been done so far, and we will continue to do, will help us to protect and keep the people of St. Kitts and Nevis safe. And so we are hoping that at the soonest possible interval, 6 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, we don't know. We have to go with the science. We will be able, as it were, to move to the new phase. And so, consistent with the Constitution, we have brought that resolution to the Parliament for support. Again, this is critical, and everywhere around the world, the state has had to intervene to protect its citizens and residents from non-compliance, from somebody deciding that he or she will not do that which is necessary, somebody determining they will not observe social distancing, somebody determined that notwithstanding the stay at home and the restriction and mass gathering, that they will go into their church and they will hold a church, as happened in Antigua, as happened in Jamaica. It is the regulations that are embodied in the emergency powers, COVID-19 regulations, that gives the state the wherewithal to be able to protect the public from those who do not wish, for whatever reason, to comply with the wisdom, with the advice, with the body of science that has been put before us. We, of course, we are a responsible democratic government, and we appreciate that at a time of a global war against the pandemic, we must use every measure available to us to protect our people and save lives. Mr. Speaker, so far, the regional community has been highly complimentary of the St. Kitts program. We started very early, Mr. Speaker, with our plans. We kept the virus at bay for the longest interval of time, Mr. Speaker. And once it got here, we were aggressive in doing what the PAHO and the WHO required us to do to contain this disease. And that is why to date, the intensity with which the pandemic has battered other countries in the region, resulting in loss of lives, we are yet to experience in St. Kitts and Nevis, and we knock board and hope that that state of play continues into perpetuity. Mr. Speaker, I want to salute the cadre of hard-working citizens and residents who are working, volunteering at the National Emergency Operations Center, both in St. Kitts and Nevis, and our Health Emergency Operations Center. I want to say thanks to all of them. Usually we speak of the frontline workers, the nurses, the doctors, the emergency technicians, the ambulance drivers, etc., etc. And at times we forget that we have not only, because in this war, there are those at the front line, those at the middle, and those who are support teams in the background doing excellent work. Today I want to commend all of them, our nurses and doctors and health workers generally, who every day get up ready to go to work in spite of the challenge and the risk. Being prepared professionals, they know that life matters, and when life matters, it is a call of duty. It is a call of duty when we are at war that motivates the soldier, whatever his circumstances, to get ready to the battle. It is that call of duty that motivates the soldier, whether he's ready to sleep or not. Once the command comes, he knows he must stand and be ready and fit for duty. In these times then, we can see the heroes. We can see the real unsung heroes, the glue that preserve our democracy and our nation state. Are those volunteers everywhere, too numerous to be mentioned by name, who do not ask for extra pay, who do not ask for anything other than give me the basic tools for me to fight this war, for myself, for my family, for my community, for my country, knowing at the end of the day, the country, once it rises and once it wins, must reward its sons and daughters. There's a time and place for everything. When a nation is fighting for its life, and the entire world now is fighting a war to preserve humanity, it is duty, the call to duty, a sense of patriotism and responsibility that must now come to the fore. And I have seen so much evidence of this being displayed that I have been inspired to work even harder to make St. Kitts and Nevis the model of the best managed state. That St. Kitts and Nevis will be the first to have overcome this and to take the people of St. Kitts and Nevis to a safer place, a healthier place, and a more prosperous place which we would enjoy. So yes, all of us are making sacrifices. The head of the NEOC, Mr. Samuel, and his support staff, they are making sacrifices every day. They are working late at nights, getting up early in the morning. And what is motivating them is that we must win this war. Same for our security officials, Mr. Brandy and his team, working hard, doing what is necessary, coming up with new ideas to police and to enforce the emergency regulations. I want to commend them. They are on call 24/7. Our customs officials, our immigration officers, they have really been the frontline team helping to keep St. Kitts and Nevis safe. And we owe them a debt of gratitude, and certainly at the appropriate time, we will reward them. We want to thank their families for lending them to us at this moment of our greatest need, when they are at the NEOC all day, 24/7, some by rotation, just as they would when there is a hurricane. A lot of persons don't know that they are dedicated civil servants who must be there around the clock, managing the national response. And that is what we have operationalized again as we face this particular threat. Of course, I want to commend too the staff of GIS, for they too have been around the clock. The head of the Government Information Service volunteered his time to assist with the reporting and information and the daily briefing at the NEOC. I want to commend Mr. Lesroy Williams and the rest of the team for doing that. I want to commend Win FM Radio, Sugar City Rock, Freedom, and all of those who have teamed up to ensure that the legitimate and the factual information, that information reaches the broadest cross-section of persons in St. Kitts and Nevis. I want to thank those in the supermarkets. They are sometimes forgotten. The cashiers, those who are packing the shelves to ensure that after the rush, the next day you come back, there's still food. We owe you all a debt of gratitude. The short point then, it is an all-of-society approach and an all-of-society response. And everyone can do and must do in support of the national imperative at this time to keep our people safe from the pandemic. I want to thank the Chamber of Industry and Commerce. It has been much involved in assisting us in navigating the intricacies of the supply chain and ensuring, by and large, that there are adequate food within St. Kitts and Nevis. And so we say to our people again, be cautious, be careful. It is okay to buy, but it is not okay to overbuy. It's not okay to end up with waste. It is not okay to tie up your resources in things you may not need when you will have other opportunities to secure them. It is one of the things we have to control. It is impulse buying. I want to thank those of our citizens and residents who patiently stand in the line, observing the social distancing requirements of 6 feet apart. The lines suddenly look long, but we have moved from the time when we could have been close to one another to the point now we have to, as it were, keep 6 feet apart of each other. Therefore, the lines, of course, will become longer than they ever used to be as a natural consequence of that. But also, too, if we are having persons going into the supermarkets more than is required, that will create a problem. We ask at this moment of challenge for our people to be at the best. Situations like these can bring out the worst in us, or they can bring out the best. I am still hopeful that for the vast majority of Kittitians and Nevisians, the pandemic will bring out the best in us, the best in our resourcefulness, the best in our ingenuity, the best in our patience, the best in our love for each other, our neighbor, our community, and our country. Because in the end, the point that Professor Rex Nettleford liked to make, all we have is us. We have seen it demonstrated. All we have is us. Once the pandemic became so brutal and intense and aggressive, attacking state after state, to a period now where it has infected over 200 jurisdictions. It was every country, as it were, to itself. The United States said, well, certain things can't go out. So Bahamas, I am sorry that you are on a line, but we can't let our ventilators go. Cayman Islands, we are sorry, but we can't let our ventilators go. And other countries around the world adopted it, perhaps more subtly, but adopted it anyway, because the national agenda, the national security required that they ensured that they had an adequate supply, as there was an unprecedented pandemic in terms of its implication, with unprecedented impact upon the supply chain. And yet here, the smallest country in the hemisphere has been able to hold itself together without panic, without loss of lives, without confusion and mayhem in the land. So I want to commend every citizen and every resident of St. Kitts and Nevis for contributing to this state of play. I want to thank you for your responsible behavior. Thank you for your support. And thank you and encourage you to continue to do the right thing. Even as we are at this point where the health practitioners are satisfied that we have been able to maintain relatively good control. Our health system is not overwhelmed. We have no deaths. We have no large number of persons, whether at JNF or Alexandra Hospital in Nevis, or Mary Charles in Molyneux, or Poxon in Sandy Point. Our health plan has worked. And I want to commend our ministers of health, Senator Wendy Phipps, for her excellent leadership, and the Honorable Gene Hamilton for his leadership too of the health sector, along with all those who are working in the Ministry of Health for their work to date. I've already commended the country at large, the frontline persons, the army, and all those other people who have been involved in this effort. The country owes you a debt of gratitude. But you understand what patriotism is about. You understand what it is to have no allegiance, no obedience, no adherence to any other state except St. Kitts and Nevis. And you have been allowing that to live. While we are at a good spot, relatively speaking, we cannot relax on our laurels. We have to continue to do the right thing, confident that our good God will not leave St. Kitts and Nevis in this tumultuous time. So let us all pray for peace, pray for progress, pray for prosperity. We will cross the Red Sea to a better place in due season. Again, I want to thank the Evangelical Association, the Christian Council, and all the other groups that have been working with us. I want to thank those citizens who have provided support to the efforts, from the unincorporated businesses to those corporations, bigger and larger, for giving solid support, ventilators, vehicles, and different forms of tangible support. Some their contribution has been to provide the meals for the staff at the NEOC, and we thank them. Whatever your contribution is, the country owes you a debt of gratitude. We want you to continue to be on your very best behavior and conduct, being assured that your Team Unity government will do everything in our power to protect you. And every measure that we implement has only one intention: to keep the people of St. Kitts and Nevis safe, as safe as can be, from what is an onslaught upon humanity everywhere, the COVID-19. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, or too many remarks, I want to commend this resolution to safe passage to the National Assembly. May God bless us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Prime Minister and mover of the resolution. I recognize the Honorable Minister of State, Madam Wendy Phipps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with the intention of supporting the motion that was placed by the member for number 7, and to, at the same time, offer my own input as the Minister of State with responsibility for health. From where I sit in the Ministry of Health, Mr. Speaker, what we are facing in St. Kitts and Nevis is something that can be considered best as having cataclysmic proportions as it relates to our people here in St. Kitts and Nevis, the OECS, the wider CARICOM area, the Caribbean Basin, and the global community. Much has been said of the impact of COVID-19. Much has been said about the disruption in lives, livelihoods, the deaths that have been created, the shattered ambitions of people who are now left to piece together their lives, and at the same time, the potential for desperation in the face of the fact that there is no vaccine and no real dedicated treatment that is a silver bullet for COVID-19. All of the international media has been dominated by nothing but COVID-19, which, in case we didn't realize it already, we should now recognize that health transcends everything else that we consider important.
True.
At the present moment, we can partner health with national security because one impacts on the other.
Yeah.
And that is the reason why we are here today. The honorable mover of the bill would have done a tremendous job in laying out the case for the state of emergency in which we now find ourselves, and for which we are seeking an extension based on the powers accorded us in the Constitution. As a result of that, I will not waste the time of the Parliament to reiterate any of those undertakings, because every one of us has a copy of the resolution in front of us. There are members of this House who have even gone so far as to post the resolution online. Whether or not that was necessary, that's another issue, because it would be in the public domain anyway. However, Mr. Speaker, from where we sit, the mover of the bill has answered several questions already. Where we are now and what we are seeking to accomplish today. And he would have started the discourse in terms of how do we get there. And by that I mean by the approval in the House today of the extension of the emergency powers. As a result of that, I would like to pick up where he left off and start by first, as he had done, thanking all of the individuals along the length and breadth of this federation who would have made it possible for this environment of change, this new state of normal, to be tolerable. I know that we have been lucky in the Federation. Thanks be to God that we only have 14 cases. A lot of that is attributed to the aggressive contact tracing, the public education, as well as the increase in testing. Per capita, we are doing exceptionally well. Even when we were at 186 tests done, we were already testing 1 in every 400 persons in the Federation. And that is a rate that even other Caribbean jurisdictions that are larger than us and with more resources than us have not been able to claim. We can point to Jamaica, who has been testing 1 in every 11,000. We can point to the United States, and I don't even want to consider the national failures that we have seen there. And if one thing this epidemic, this pandemic has taught us, is that we should not look to other jurisdictions for what we should do in our own countries. Because every country is at a different level of operation, a different level of response, a different type of ethos from the health administration in terms of what is necessary. And we have seen it loud and clear, even from our neighbors in the north, that if we were to be foolishly following that example, Cropper would be smoking our pipe right now, to put it bluntly. What I would like us to also focus on as we continue to thank the persons that we have in front of us are the whole cadre of individuals, whether it's the media, the Christian Council, the Evangelical Association, And of course, I have to single out SKNIS, companies like Open Interactive, etc., our 311 operators, the NEOC operators, people who are now making up their beds on the floor of the NEMA headquarters. We congratulate all of them, we thank them, the people who cater meals for them. But most importantly, we in the Ministry of Health would like to thank the general public for their support, because for the most part, they have cooperated well in the face of grave difficulty, anxieties, worries, fear of the unknown. That would naturally come to us. As it is right now, the last experience of a pandemic that this world would have seen would have been in 1918. When last I checked, none of us in here has an age range in a 3-digit figure, which means none of us were present for the last pandemic. What this also means is that there is no rule book that we can go to and say, this is what you do in the face of COVID-19, because this is a creature of a different nature. And while the record shows that the Spanish flu of 1918 would have amounted in 50,000 deaths and maybe 50 million deaths and 500 million infections, because its roots were in some sort of an avian flu, what we would refer to years ago as the swine flu. The fact is, we do not want to see those kinds of propensities in figures in our jurisdiction in a modern-day global environment. And it is for that reason, in an era where we know that we have a best practice globally in terms of finding vaccines, there is so much unease because there is no vaccine. And while it is true that we commend the government of China for actually doing the gene sequencing on the virus very early so that they can get it out to international laboratories who are all in a race against time to come up with a credible, efficacious vaccine, the fact is that we still have an individual and collective responsibility to do what we need to do, what we've been advised to do by World Health authorities in terms of keeping that virus at bay. The simplest of things, hand washing, hand sanitizing, social distancing of 6 feet. It might sound like a stock record, we might be saying it ad nauseum, but it needs to be said over and over again. The wearing of masks, all of these other things that we now find ourselves having to do. The physical distances, the refraining from embracing, which is something, as the mover said, is really anathema almost to the people of the Caribbean, not to mention St. Kitts and Nevis. We can understand the difficulty of parents with young children who thrive on affection and encouragement, that even at that level you have to be so cautious. We can also sympathize with persons who are caring for the elderly, that you want to care for them, you need to care for them, but you need to make sure that you yourself do not become a typhoid Mary, to carry an infection to them that their bodies can ill afford to stand up against. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, as we continue to build out our responsiveness to COVID-19, it is imperative for us to begin to look forward. What will the new normal look like? And as Don Lemon of CNN put it a few nights ago, we will suddenly come to recognize that we do not understand what this new normal is about, and when it comes, we will be ill-prepared to recognize and to adapt to the fact that the new normal will not have anything about it that is abnormal because of its unprecedented nature. And as a result of that, it behoves us to ensure that we do everything in our power to make it possible for us to defend ourselves as small island developing states against this COVID-19 threat. And I find it ironic and at the same time unfortunate that the world has been brought to its knees by an infection that started in a G7 country, a country that should have been more advanced than most countries, a country that you would not expect to have been the epicenter of something that has spread like wildfire, to the point where, as of this present moment, we have in excess of 2.2 million persons infected with COVID-19, compared to where we were just about maybe 8 weeks ago. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we have been fortunate that we have been able to put aside an extra 18 million or so in terms of the bolstering of the existing health infrastructure in the Federation. We have also been very fortunate with the responsiveness of our own people, private individuals, corporate entities, who, without us even asking a question, when we do a rough calculation of what they have given in addition to that, it's in excess of $400,000. And that is worthy of commendation. A lot of that has come in the form of monetary donations. It has come in the form of contribution of equipment as far as Europe and as nearby as perhaps maybe the region in itself. On that score, I would like to document the gratitude of the Ministry of Health for the strong support of the WHO and in particular PAHO. The honorable mover of the bill would have referred to a meeting that PAHO would have convened on Monday. And that meeting was very eye-opening, very telling, and very sobering for those of us who were online. It was a ministerial meeting in which the director of the PAHO, Dr. Carissa Etienne of Dominica, would have basically told us, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. We congratulate you for what you've done. We can confirm that in the English-speaking Caribbean, there has been no evidence of local or community transmission, but brace yourself because the next 2 weeks might be something unprecedented in terms of hospitalization and deaths. We have been fortunate, Mr. Speaker, that up to Monday, in terms of the Caribbean and Atlantic region of PAHO, we would have had only 6,265 cases and 321 deaths. Unfortunately, however, out of that 321 deaths, 183 would have been documented as close by as the Dominican Republic. And we are seeing the numbers rise in several territories. Our neighbor Antigua, a 20-minute flight away, already has seen about 2 or 3 deaths. And the death toll is rising in Jamaica, as well as in Trinidad and Tobago, and we've seen it in Barbados as well. We have also recognized that just this morning, there is a new report out that just one company in Jamaica has seen 50 positive cases, which changes the ball game yet again, because it tells you, as Dr. Etienne herself would have encouraged us with caution, that while we are saving lives and protecting our healthcare workers and slowing the spread of the infection, we have to move very cautiously with the relaxation of the emergency powers that have been put in place and the guidelines for the WHO. What we do not want is to find ourselves in a foolish state of comfort where we tell ourselves we have no deaths, we are flattening the curve, etc., and then to drop our guard, open our borders, including to countries for which the virus is endemic, and then we find ourselves looking down the barrel of a second wave with community transmission, and that for us is like trying to put out a forest fire on a hot day without rain. So we do not want to get to that point. What would a new normal be for us? None of us in this chamber knows that. None of us in this country knows that. None of us in the global environment knows that. But what we in the cabinet and in the Ministry of Health would like to see happen is that the best practices that have already taken root in the Federation in terms of social distancing, hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene, etc., will move forward with us. Similarly to when we brought Cricket World Cup here in 2007, and we still to this day can look to certain practices that were considered best practices then, and they're still with us today. Because every experience has to be a learning experience for us. If we do not learn the positive lessons that are there to be learned from COVID-19, we will make the mistakes of the past and forgot everything that history would have taught us. We are a small country and we are a resilient country. We are also a resilient people, but we have to approach this thing with common sense. It calls for unity of purpose. It calls for an all-of-society response. It transcends the politics. It transcends the socio-economic tags that we have placed on ourselves and on each other. This is not a time to be jocular. This is not a time to appear to be foolish when you're supposed to be in a leadership position in this country. What is coming out loud and clear in this pandemic is that because of the failures that we would have seen in certain larger countries, because of the criticisms that have now been directed to the Director General of the WHO, what we are seeing emerging is a dearth of global leadership when it comes to COVID-19, and that vacuum cannot be allowed to continue. What we need in this country are people to show the public what kind of metal you're made of, at the local level, at the personal level, at the corporate level, because that is what it is going to take to get us there. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I think it is within our right as people in this country to use the parliamentary and legislative provisions that we have in front of us to give ourselves the breathing space and the time to let the science continue to inform us in terms of bracing ourselves for what is to come. We need not put ourselves in a false sense of comfort. We need not listen to the alternative voices that are not considered authorities on health by any stretch of the imagination. And Lord knows we have seen a lot of overnight professionals when it comes to public health. Everybody has the answer. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, what I would challenge us to do is that we have an opportunity more than ever before in the history of this country, pre-independence and post, to show to the world and to ourselves here and to the young people who will take this country forward that we are in a position now more than ever to live in a country where we practice the motto, country above self. This is the time that we are going to have to stand up and be counted for this. Because what we are facing, Mr. Speaker, is an existential crisis. A crisis that is challenging our right to even be alive. And it is not going to be overcome by wishful thinking, by the criticisms that are unfounded, but it will be overcome by collective effort, trust in the God whose name has been enshrined in the 2 stanzas of our anthem, and to recognize that that is the crux, the fulcrum on which our development as a country is going to move forward. As small island developing states, Mr. Speaker, if it's one lesson we need to learn coming out of COVID-19, it is the fact that we cannot rely for our future sustainable development on the major world powers. We have to use this opportunity to create yet another best practice, which is a national resilience unlike anything we have ever seen before. And it cuts across so many areas of endeavor in our economy, in our agriculture, in our food security, in our national security, in the way in which we educate children. It shows us now, in the absence of a vaccine, the imperatives that need to be placed in terms of environmental consciousness, focus on STEM subjects in school, science, technology, engineering, and math, to get us to where we need to get to on the local stage, and to continue to hold our place in the regional and international stages. As such, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, from the standpoint of the Ministry of Health, the future of the Federation is also going to demand that we focus heavily on achieving the goals that we had set forth since 2007 in terms of the Port of Spain Declaration, because the CARICOM member states have sadly lagged in terms of the deliverables from that declaration. This focused on NCDs and the fact that we were saying that we were declaring war on it. And truth be told, globally, the persons who are more likely than not to suffer harmful, painful impacts as a result of COVID-19 are those persons with underlying conditions, specifically with NCDs, whether it's hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, kidney failure. These are the persons who are most affected in addition to the elderly. And it is going to call for a shifting of the paradigm and an acceleration of the mandate of the Port of Spain Declaration to assist us in getting there, in building resilience, in improving the health and wellness of our people, and to ensure that going forward, everything we do in the name of the development of this country must have healthcare at the epicenter. We cannot do it otherwise, because the healthcare of our sector is very much tied into the competitiveness of our country, our ability to compete regionally and internationally. And the best way we do that is with our people, with our labor force, because it can't happen any other way. It won't happen with concrete, it won't happen with technology. It has to be driven by human potential and human productivity. I would call us, Mr. Speaker, to focus the mandate that we have in front of us on saving lives, on protecting our healthcare workers, and also slowing the spread of the infection. We need to move forward with the extension of these emergency powers for however long they might be within the mandate of the Constitution. And the debate today will guide us as to how long that period should be for the foreseeable future. As such, Mr. Speaker, I fully support the motion that we get constitutional cover and legislative cover in terms of the extension of the emergency powers, and that we approach everything we do going forward with common sense, with empathy, and with deep and enduring value for human life now and for the foreseeable future. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister Wendy Phipps, for your contribution. Next contribution, please.
We had two already. Jesus Christ. Mr. Speaker. They keep talking about we have this number. We know that they're not news. Can I come to
I recognize the Honourable Member for number 3, Conris Maynard.
Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I rise to make a presentation or my contribution on the present resolution before this National Assembly. I would like to take this opportunity as we discuss the resolution to firstly send out our best wishes to those in our society who have been impacted by this COVID-19 virus. In particular, our hearts are with those who have tested positive for the COVID-19, and we would wish them a speedy recovery such that they would be virus-free in a matter of days. And then, of course, you have our frontline workers who are at the forefront of dealing with this particular pandemic. They would be the ones who would have to interact with anyone who may have tested positive for the virus. They would be the ones to have to interact in the institutions that are more susceptible to have remnants of the virus. There are a plethora of persons who constitute frontline workers. And we here, I believe, in the opposition, and I'm certain the entire National Assembly, provide unwavering support to them. And that is why we hope that after this resolution is passed, we would be granted the opportunity to have a resolution of this National Assembly commending the work of the frontline and essential workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been passed to the clerk of the National Assembly, and we are hoping that we will have full support of this august body in commending the work through a resolution of the frontline and essential workers. We know of them, the health officials, the nurses, the doctors, the security forces, those in the emergency services, sanitation workers, those who keep everything running while we're here, people who keep the telecommunications going, public utilities. You have volunteers, you have media personnel. All of these persons, essential workers and frontline workers, keep us sustained at least when we are in a state of emergency. We want to commend as well the health professionals who I believe are trying their best in whatever circumstances to assist us, this federation, in protecting ourselves and the interests of the country from the impacts of COVID-19. As many have said, this is a worldwide pandemic, and we have not been spared. And there have been some decisions that have been taken as we try to fight this virus. Albeit there will be discussions about the timing of certain decisions made, but our borders right now remain closed. From what I understand, the government is saying, according to them, that there is no community spread, although others may have a varying perspective. In fact, recently, I think the Prime Minister in his address spoke of the relaxation of some of the stringent measures that have been put in place to safeguard against the spread of the virus. So when our borders have remained closed, when the government has said that there is no community spread, when the Prime Minister has said that in coming days they will be looking at how to introduce other non-essential services, then how does it follow that we enter a parliament today to extend the state of emergency to possibly up to 12 months? Those things don't follow. Our borders remain closed. So if the government is saying that we have contained the spread in-house and our borders are closed, if the government is looking to relax, if the government has said, as the Prime Minister said today, that he wants to, or he's trying to be the first country to eradicate the virus, how does it follow that we have a resolution coming after a 21-day state of emergency to one that extends for up to 12 months?
Or shorter.
You see,
That's what the Constitution says.
one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that any decision that we take here in our parliament, it sends signals to our population. And a signal coming from the parliament that it is extending a state of emergency up to 12 months suggests, for instance, that those people who have been let off from work, who cannot go out to work, who are not making any money, will ask themselves, well, what does this mean? A state of emergency for up to 12 months? How does that impact my ability to apply my trade, especially if I'm on the last end of a non-essential worker? And so we have to be mindful of what the economic impact can be by stating to the world, stating to investors, that we can have an emergency, state of emergency, for up to 12 months. That is not how it is done anywhere else in the world. And that is actually what the Constitution does not provide for, and I will go into that. The Constitution is very specific. And it is my view that this resolution may be at foul with the Constitution. And I want to expatiate on that. If we turn, as well, I'll read it from the resolution itself, and then I will go to the section of the Constitution that applies. In paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the resolution, it states that, and whereas pursuant to section 19, I do not understand why the vagueness there, as opposed to the specific nature of the paragraph before that identifies 19.3. But whereas pursuant to section 19 of the St. Christopher and Nevis 1983 constitutional order, a declaration of emergency may be extended by resolution of the National Assembly up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified therein. Let's go to what the Constitution says, actually, and this comes from section 19.7. So, Mr. Speaker, if you would turn with me to section 19.7. And section 19 is the section of the Constitution that allows for the declaration of emergencies. And 19.7 reads, which I presume where the resolution is taking it from, as it was not specific as to where in 19. A resolution of the National Assembly or the Nevis Island Assembly passed for the purposes of this section shall remain in force for 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified therein. It goes on. Provided that any such resolution may be extended from time to time by a further such resolution, each extension not exceeding 12 months from the date of the resolution effecting the extension, and any such resolution may be revoked at any time by a further resolution. So let's zero in on the first part of 19.7. It says a resolution of the National Assembly or the Nevis Island Assembly passed for the purposes of this section, which is granting a state of emergency and the things therein, shall remain in force for, and I'm putting in my own words now because the Constitution used the term or, so it is either 12 months that the Constitution allows you to extend it for, or for a specified time therein. Which means that the resolution must tell us what the time of the resolution is. It is either 12 months or it is either a shorter time as may be specified therein. It can't be both. Can't be both. That's not how it works. That is why every proclamation that the governor made, it had a start time and an end time. But this resolution only has a start time. And so I want to read it for the general public. Now, therefore, be it resolved, this is the resolution before us, be it resolved by the National Assembly that it is necessary to extend the state of emergency up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified to take effect from, and I presume they will add the date. So, emergency up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified. Specified by whom? No one outside of this parliament, after this resolution has passed, can specify a time. The Prime Minister can't, after this is passed, say, okay, well, it will stop at this particular time. No. The Parliament has to decide when it's going to start and when it's going to end. And so, some may make the argument, well, the Parliament is about to dissolve automatically on May 14. And so we want to put something that is protective. So that is why you either have to do 12 months or you have to specify the time. But I want to refer the general public to how the Constitution deals with a situation that if we have an emergency, it gives the Parliament the power to reconvene in order to deal with that emergency. So therefore, I want to turn to section 47(5) of our Constitution. Section 47(5). This section deals with the prorogation and dissolution of our Parliament. And perhaps for clarity, I should read the sections leading up to section 5. So section 47 reads, the Governor General may at any time prorogue or dissolve Parliament. Subject to subsection 3, Parliament, unless sooner dissolved, shall continue for 5 years from the date of the first sitting of the National Assembly after any dissolution and shall then stand dissolved. Meaning that in 2015, when we met, I believe, around May 14 for the first time, the Parliament automatically dissolves May 14th when it comes. No question about that. At any time when Her Majesty is at war, Parliament may extend the period of 5 years specified in subsection 2 for not more than 12 months at a time. And by the way, the Constitution defines war as St. Kitts and Nevis in hostility with another country. That is the definition of war in the Constitution. So it doesn't apply in this case. Provided that the life of the Parliament shall not be extended under this subsection for more than 5 years. Meaning if the country is at war, you can extend it for 12 months at a time, but not more than 5 years. But we're not at war. We don't have any hostility with any other country. So that's not an issue here. In the exercise of his powers to dissolve the Parliament, the Governor General shall act in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister. We all know this. Provided that if the office of the Prime Minister is vacant and the Governor General, acting in his own deliberate judgment, considers that there is no prospect of his being able within a reasonable time to appoint to that office a person who commands the support of the majority of the representatives, the Governor General shall dissolve Parliament. What it's basically saying is that we cannot have a situation where we don't have a Prime Minister. So if there is nobody who can meet the requirements for a Prime Minister, we have to dissolve and have an election. That is to protect the operation of the executive. Section 5, which I was referring to, 47(5). If after a dissolution of Parliament and before the holding of the general election of representatives, the Prime Minister advises the Governor General that because of some matter of urgent national importance, it is necessary to recall Parliament, the Governor General shall summon the Parliament that has been dissolved to meet, but the general election of representatives shall proceed, and the Parliament that has been recalled shall, if not sooner dissolved, again stand dissolved on the date appointed for the nomination of candidates in that general election. So what does that mean? It means if we do like other countries, this thing is coming off of my face here. If we do like other countries and extend, let's say, a 21-day extension, a 30-day extension, because it is very dynamic. If the parliament dissolves before there is a need to completely done away with the state of emergency, the Constitution allows for us, for the Governor General, to recall this parliament to have another debate on a resolution to do with a matter of national importance, urgent matter, which of course this falls in. So there is absolutely no need under the sun for us to be coming to Parliament today to have a resolution to extend for 12 months or some shorter time. Because the resolution has to say it's either going to be 12 months or it's going to be a specified time. Because it cannot be open-ended. Because nobody outside of Parliament can then put a date on that. In fact, to get rid of the order of the resolution, we have to come back to Parliament to revoke it. So right now, this causes confusion. Because it needs a date when it expires. So it's either going to be 12 months, as the Constitution says. It's either going to be 12 months.
In terms of the, no, not in terms of time, in terms of the mask.
The what?
In terms of the mask on your face, if it's creating some discomfort.
No, it's okay because we have to practice as much safety as possible.
I just wanted to give you the...
Yes.
that
So, and I am speaking, so when you speak, you can, what they said now, 6 feet or so, you can spread your thing. So I don't want to be held responsible for anything. So I don't mind. I have another one here, maybe I should change it to that. Let's see how this one works. Oh, you said blue, it matching my suit, man. Yes. All right. So let's see how this one works. Always prepared. So, Mr. Speaker, the resolution is flawed. Not that I have any problem with the fact that we are not yet out of the situation of the pandemic. Not that I am discrediting anything that the health professionals are saying. But there is absolutely no need under the sun for us on April 17, 2020 to extend a state of emergency by 12 months in the first case, but then to have a resolution that does not specify the end date of the state of emergency. It has to be like that. It is very clear in the Constitution. And the thing about it is, and the problem I have, especially with the leader of this government, is as long as somebody from the opposition side says something, then it has no merit. That is his modus operandi. And so there will be no consideration, by him at least, that a second look ought to be taken. But I have a tad bit more confidence in the Attorney General.
Really?
Just a tad bit. That he will show that first of all, we cannot have a resolution that doesn't have an end date. Just open-ended. And the reason why is that nobody thereafter can change that. So effectively, since it doesn't have an end date, it therefore means that this is a resolution for 12 months. And the Parliament has to reconvene in order to stop it and revoke it. So these are the very important points that I want us to take into consideration as we debate this particular resolution. The Parliament is the one who specifies the time. Just like the Governor General under the powers of the same section 19 gave the governor the ability to have a state of emergency up to a specified number of time. And in every one of those proclamations, there was a start time and an end time. And every new one that came started after the old one ended. In fact, if one ended at 6 a.m., the other one started at 6:01. Then that ended at 6 a.m. at another time. But this one, the one that has been brought to us this morning, and you know it's an emergency, so resolutions, you know, and then to hear that the senator opposite says that a member has posted this online as if that this should not be in the public domain.
I would wish the honorable member opposite, when he's quoting me, to do so correctly.
She.
No, it was the gentleman who said it.
She.
Okay? Because what I did say is not that it's a matter that we're here to do this or we're here to do that. I am saying at the end of the day that basically we are here to debate an issue. And the matters will come out in debate. That is the purpose of a debate. Huh? It's not a matter of knowing afterwards. The point I made is that someone posted it online and it was entirely unnecessary because it's a document that would be in the public domain anyhow.
Let me say this, Mr. Speaker, that in fact, only because this is a resolution, but ordinarily a bill would have, even if it's not finished, it is to be placed in the public domain. So as soon as I get this as a representative in this house, I have a duty. But the member took the time to state that. And yes, I need to ensure that everybody knows what the government is trying to do, which I disagree with. I cannot support an open-ended resolution. It will cause confusion. People will start asking questions that are unnecessary as it relates to the constitutionality of elections, as it relates to the dissolution of parliament. We need to be specific. So I would humbly suggest that a time frame be specified so that we are minded to consider the support of something like that. It cannot be read like this as it is now. That now, therefore, be it hereby resolved by this National Assembly that it is necessary to extend the state of emergency up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified. Yeah, they left out therein. Constitution says specified therein, meaning the Constitution requires that on the resolution you must specify the time therein in the resolution. So leaving it here as may be specified gives the impression that sometime after somebody can specify a time. Like when you have a bill and it gives the minister the ability to make regulations thereafter. This is not what this is. Once the resolution is passed, that is it. Government can't sit in cabinet and say that the resolution will end, state of emergency will end on April this or that. the resolution has to say it. And that is what people are concerned about. Why is it that it is so difficult, even in this time of national crisis, to just be upfront with what you intend to do? If you want it for 12 months, then just say 12 months. That is why today I was so disheartened when the leader of government business came to me and Marcelo and said that everyone, can we agree that everyone speaks for half an hour? I asked a few questions. We consulted. We said, okay. Only for him to come after and say that everyone, asking for a motion, that everyone speaks for half an hour, except the mover of the resolution. It is the same modus operandi that people are fed up with. Just be upfront. This is a time of national crisis. Come on. What's that about? And we want clarity. When you have national crisis in a country and the government is not clear on what it is doing, it has the potential greater than other times to cause confusion. And people are already asking me, well, what does this mean? It mean lockdown for 12 months? It mean I can't work? It mean that I can't get bread for my family? What about the tourism industry? You're sending a signal to the world that even if you open up, I have passed in my parliament a resolution for 12 months. People want to know. They want to have some confidence that when you say something, they can understand it. And this resolution creates confusion and unnecessary confusion at that. It also doesn't follow, as I started by saying as I end, that the government itself is saying that the borders remain closed, that there is no community spread according to them, although people who have not traveled contracted the virus here in St. Kitts and Nevis. They're saying that they're speaking of relaxation, introducing non-essential services to the people. And that constitutes bringing a resolution for 12 months, the maximum time given to you? What kind of signal is that? We have to be so careful with our words when it comes to the economic outlook. People who might be willing to invest to help jumpstart the economy may think twice that the government knows something that they don't know. Why they are able to have a 12-month state of emergency open-ended resolution. All it has is a start date. You ever hear more? Something got a start date while it said some shorter time, but no end date. Let me read it again so you're clear. Now therefore be it hereby resolved by this National Assembly that it is necessary to extend the state of emergency up to a period of 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified, they didn't say by who, to take effect from dash day of April 2020 to combat the threat of the COVID-19 virus to the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis. So we're going to start on some day in April, which I should presume is tomorrow, and we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know when it's going to end. And that is why you have to take incremental steps. That is why you have to take incremental steps and say, we will do 3 weeks, we'll do 21 days. After that, we will do another 14 days. Or we're going to do 30 days. But 365 days? So nobody plan for any type of small social distancing culture, Ramo. I am not.
because it needs to be specific. Must be specific. I want to support the health of professionals in the best advice that they can possibly give to keep our country safe and our people safe. With that must come clear and decisive decisions of a government. And many have said that this government has fallen way short of that. Started out with bundled things, a speech on a day, then coming to correct it, a decision today and 2 days later correct it. So they are saying that they want specific and a confident government to conduct their affairs. And the government must make clear that this resolution is not intended to subvert the democratic processes that are constitutionally due under our Constitution of St. Kitts and Nevis. With these few words, Mr. Speaker, may it please you.
Thank you very much, the Honourable Member for Constituency 3, Conris Maynard. I recognize the Honourable Senator Akila. I recognize the Honourable Senator Akila Bayon Nisbet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I rise to make my contribution to the bill before this honourable, the resolution, sorry, before this honourable House. Mr. Speaker, we are here today because our federation is facing one of the greatest threats to our future, Mr. Speaker. We are facing an enemy that we cannot see. One, Mr. Speaker, that all would note would not have existed just a mere 6 months ago. Mr. Speaker, we all would also agree that with this COVID-19, we are all in this struggle together, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today in these chambers, we are here because we need to figure out our next step in order for us to be able to defeat this COVID-19 and stop the spread of this virus within our federation. Mr. Speaker, a lot have been said, but there are still so many persons who would reach out and ask quite a number of questions as to what really is this COVID-19? What is this coronavirus? So as much as we talk about it, there's still persons out there who have not gotten all the information and still do not even have any idea of the seriousness of this COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. And just to give them a bit of a background information, Mr. Speaker, to add to this debate. It was on the 21st of December 2019 that a cluster of patients within Wuhan, China, would have reported pneumonia-like symptoms of unknown origin, Mr. Speaker. In January 2020, this year, the Centers for Disease Control reported a new form of coronavirus, which we now know as COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, the first death to coronavirus would have been reported on the 11th of January 2020, just after the World Health Organization would have gotten approval to enter the country to do some research on this virus. Just 12 days after that, 17 persons would have sadly lost their battle to this virus as well, Mr. Speaker. And then on January 30th, the World Health Organization would have declared this a global health emergency after thousands of new cases would have been reported. 3 days, just 3 days after that, we heard of the first death outside of China, which would have been in the Philippines. And then on the 11th of February 2020, the World Health Organization would officially name this COVID-19, giving it a name, and to where we are now today. By March, the first cases would have been reported here in the Caribbean, in the Dominican Republic, Martinique, and St. Barts. Mr. Speaker, the global response to COVID has been rapid. To remind those present, it was only 1 month ago that the World Health Organization would have declared this a global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, there are still persons who ask, is it really that serious? Do we really need to take all of this precaution? Is it really as dangerous as they say? But what we have to understand about the coronaviruses, for which COVID-19 falls part of, is that it is a group of illnesses that includes the common cold, as well as other epidemics, such as SARS, I'm sure we all remember, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory syndromes, which both spread in 2003 and 2012. Starting with a dry cough and a temperature, they attack the airwaves of patients, making it difficult to breathe, with severe cases of COVID-19 leading to complete organ failure, Mr. Speaker. Is it dangerous? Yes, it is. It is highly contagious and easily spread from person to person, hence the reasons we're having so much lockdowns around the world. So let's try to do some math on this, Mr. Speaker. And let's just use an example. If we have a common cold and you cough or you sneeze, I cough, I sneeze, I pass it to just about 1.4 persons, Mr. Speaker. If that person cough or sneeze, they pass it to 1.4. If that happens about 10 times, then just about 14 persons will be infected with the common cold. Because I know there are persons out there who say, well, it's just a cold. It's just another one of the flus that we have all the time. But let's compare that, 10 equal 14, to the COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, which is 3 times more infections. And if one person infected coughs or sneeze, they pass it to 3 persons, not 1.4, but 3 persons. Might not sound like so much of a difference, but it adds up. Because what happens with just 10 times? One person infecting 3 persons, those 3 people infecting 3 more persons, and in just about 10 coughs or sneeze, 59,000 people can be infected, Mr. Speaker. 59,000 persons is greater than our population here in the Federation, Mr. Speaker, and is the reason why this government continues to take such action to ensure that we maintain the health of our country. Mr. Speaker, I was going through an article on Forbes magazine where they were speaking about countries that they consider to be doing a good job at controlling the spread. And they spoke about New Zealand. And they said that New Zealand would have locked down the entire country, and they considered it early, just after 6 cases. I could recall in St. Kitts and Nevis, it was after 2 cases that we were locked down, borders closed, no more travel into the island, no more travel out of the island unless you were going back to your home destination. Cruise ships were stopped, all in an event to ensure that we maintain and contain the spread. And when I hear that, I am thinking to myself, if this magazine, Forbes, heard about what we did here in St. Kitts, they probably would have said the same thing, that St. Kitts and Nevis did take the measures necessary and is doing a good job in ensuring that the citizens are well taken care of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the measures that we have taken is to ensure that persons stay at home. It is a small sacrifice, but it is saving lives, Mr. Speaker. If we stop the spread, we stop the virus, and we stop possibly losing much of our loved ones, Mr. Speaker. We are acting on the advice of the medical team, Mr. Speaker. It's not about just deciding in a room with just the ministers that this is what we're going to do. No. Team Unity is acting on the advice of the persons who know best right now, and that is our health workers, Mr. Speaker, our CMO and our medical chief of staff, as well as Mr. Samuel and Nemo, Mr. Speaker. That is what is needed to ensure the safety of our people. Mr. Speaker, the curfews announced have stopped all but essential travel and movement, reducing the likely spread of COVID-19. It has also allowed our healthcare and essential workers to get on with the work that they do, helping patients and keeping supplies entering the country. Mr. Speaker, I know that people out there, we rather to be liming, because you hear many persons say that, just want to go liming. They just want to go see their family. They want to be able to do things as they normally do. And I understand it, because I miss being able to just go by a family member or be able to just do any old thing. My children complain and say they're ready to see their friends as well. They want to go back to school. But we can't do that, Mr. Speaker. And I could understand the frustration of everybody. But we have to remember that it's a sacrifice that we are making now to ensure that in the future we will be better off, Mr. Speaker. Yes. And outside of ensuring that the health of the country is safe and kept to a place where we will be able to manage and cope, Mr. Speaker, there were also economic measures taken by this government pretty early on, which has sought to protect the health as well as family incomes at this time, Mr. Speaker. And we can't underscore the fact that this is made possible because of surplus after surplus, and more importantly, based on the fact that we were able to pay off the IMF debt very early on. And so now we have the money that we need to ensure that we have economic stimulus in St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Speaker. And we all know some of those measures that were introduced, the 16.9 million that was pumped into the health, on top of the 62 million that would have already been announced in the budget of 2020. Property tax postponements, no VAT on import duties on hygiene products for 6 months, no import charges on fruits and vegetables and fruit drinks, cold preparations and vitamins, Mr. Speaker. No water charges from April to June for persons who would have their work reduced or income lost because of COVID, Mr. Speaker. The 8% corporation tax cut from April to June for businesses who maintain at least 75% of their employee base, their workforce, Mr. Speaker. 50% tax cut from 4% to 2% for incorporated businesses from April to June, Mr. Speaker. $10 million to boost our production in agriculture. Food safety, Mr. Speaker. We all hear about this. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a good injection into our agriculture. And it shows that this government is taking our food security seriously, ensuring that the farmers get what they need in order to be able to provide for our country, dear Mr. Speaker, at this time. They even were given water charges were completely eliminated for farmers, Mr. Speaker, from April to September, because we have to ensure that our agriculture industry gets the boost that it needs to be able to manage the food production within our country, because even after this, a new normal will be developed. And there might be issues, we never know, but we are preparing ourselves now for what the future might hold, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 5 million additional into the poverty alleviation program. And this must have been some foresight, Mr. Speaker, because we have to remember that this program has been put in place for some time now. Had we known that this would be happening, nobody even knew about it, and now we're hearing even other countries trying to come up with a similar program, Mr. Speaker. That was some vision and foresight that only the God up above know why he put that type of vision in Team Unity at that time, Mr. Speaker. But we are seeing it reaping the benefits now, and we are thankful, Mr. Speaker. Income assistance for workers up to $1,000 per month, Mr. Speaker. Loan repayments frozen at Development Bank for mortgages for those affected, Mr. Speaker. Freeze on electricity payments for those affected. 5 million additional for Fresh Start program. 30 million for mortgage loans for residents of St. Kitts and Nevis. And many other capital projects getting the injection that they need and the stimulus they need to make sure that our economy keeps going, Mr. Speaker. Our federation is leading in its response, Mr. Speaker. We've heard about it time and time again, and we've heard about it not just within our local economy, but we've heard it from even the international, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you add all of the monies invested up, we're looking at Team Unity spending just about $2,200 per person to help them at this time, Mr. Speaker, and that is commendable, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have before us a resolution introduced by the Prime Minister, which gives our nation certainty it needs to fight this disease, Mr. Speaker. And much have been said about timing. Much have been said about it should have some end date. And much have been said about the Constitution. And I read it, the Constitution as well. And I looked at the same section 19, but then I look at 7. And in section 19:7 it says that a resolution of the National Assembly or the Nevis Island Assembly passed for the purpose of this section shall remain in force for 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified therein, Mr. Speaker. No more debate needed, Mr. Speaker, on timing. No more debate necessary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would allow the government acting on medical advice, Mr. Speaker, to reduce non-essential travel and movement for up to 12 months. And it could be shorter, correct? It may not just be 12 months, it could be 6 weeks. It could be 3 months. We don't know. We are just making sure we prepare the country and the persons understand that this is a pandemic that we have no idea how long this will last. But all accounts tell us that we're in this for the long haul. We have to prepare for the long haul. And so that is what this government is doing. We are preparing the country for what is the long haul, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we talk about Australia. In Australia, the Prime Minister there have even told his nation that you all have to prepare for restrictions up until the end of the year. He didn't give any specific time, he just says up until the end of the year. Perhaps in the first instance. We cannot afford uncertainty, Mr. Speaker, as we critically fight this, Mr. Speaker. We cannot risk the spike in COVID-19 cases, Mr. Speaker. A spike in cases would risk the health and well-being of doctors, of nurses, of persons working at all of our hospitals, Mr. Speaker, and we cannot afford that, Mr. Speaker. We cannot afford it because we have families, Mr. Speaker. Even if we just look in my community, Lime Key, West Farm, Boys, Matinley, Garvey, Shadwell, Lagreed. We can't afford it, Mr. Speaker. We can't afford to risk the lives of our elderly, Mr. Speaker. Those in the carding home, we can't afford to do that, Mr. Speaker. And I would never accept those risks, Mr. Speaker. Never. And that is why I will support this resolution, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we need time to fight, Mr. Speaker. We need to allow time for the measures we have introduced to take effect. We hear it from every world leader, Mr. Speaker. We hear it from the WHO, Mr. Speaker. We hear it from the CDC, Mr. Speaker. We hear it from our CMO. We hear it from our Chief Medical of Staff, Mr. Speaker. We hear it from Abdiel Samuel of Nevis, Mr. Speaker. We keep hearing that. Give it time to work. And that is what this resolution will do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remind everyone that parts of Italy have been in near 24-hour lockdown, Mr. Speaker, for 55 days. We have to be patient, Mr. Speaker, and we must have laws that back our medical professionals, because this is what this is, Mr. Speaker. This resolution is only backing what our medical experts have been advising us to do, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to suggest and to just ask kindly of our members opposite to listen and understand and listen to the advice of our medical team and what we have here now, and stand with us as we fight this virus, Mr. Speaker. That's all we're trying to do. It's in the best interest of the health of the people of this country. Let's put all of this politicking aside and think about our nation and our people and the health of our country, Mr. Speaker. This is what this resolution is doing, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, in everything that we do, we just have to remember that it's always important for us to say thank you as well. And so we have to say thank you to the individuals who have been staying at home, who have been listening to the advice, who have been listening to the rules and regulations, and have been staying at home. Because by staying at home, you are fighting this fight with us, and we have to say thank you to you. We have to say thank you to our health workers, our doctors, our nurses, our caregivers, our midwives, the persons who have been putting themselves on the front line, some without even asking for anything. We have to say thank you to them. We must say thank you, Mr. Speaker, to our CMO, Dr. Hazel Laws, to Dr. Cameron Wilkinson, to Abdia Samuel, to NEMA, to members of the COVID-19 task force, to the police, to the security forces. We must say thank you to them, Mr. Speaker, because if you think about it, our security and border personnel, they're keeping our streets safe, our borders safe. It's because of their quick action, where we only had 2 cases reported first, and today we are only at 14 cases, Mr. Speaker, because they are ensuring that they maintain that we keep ourselves safe and everybody follows the advice of the medical team and the legislation that have been put in place to support the medical team, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to say thank you to our shopkeepers and our supermarket, the persons who pack the shelves, the person who clean. They are all doing this, Mr. Speaker, with us. They are all in this fight together, Mr. Speaker. We have to be able to thank our farmers and our fisher folks, Mr. Speaker, because they are allowing us to have the food that we need, Mr. Speaker. And so we must thank them, Mr. Speaker. To all the citizens of this country who have contributed in whatever small way, we have to say thank you to them, Mr. Speaker, because we see that everybody understands that together is how we'll be able to fight this COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. And everybody have been doing their part to ensure that we do, Mr. Speaker. And we also have to thank our partners, the Taiwanese, who have not only supplied 46,000 masks, but we have known that they have shared with us, their medical teams have shared with us what it is that they have been doing in Taiwan to ensure that they keep their numbers low. And because they have been sharing those experiences with our medical team, we now have this way of being able to fight this disease with the determination that we need to be able to fight it with, and with the confidence that somehow, somewhere we will flatten or reduce this curve immediately, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just have to remind everybody that we are all in this together. We are all in this together. And together we will be able to overcome, Mr. Speaker. It's the little things. I know of persons who are making sure that they check on their neighbors and their loved ones, Mr. Speaker. And that is what is important at a time like this, to be able to be our brother's keeper. I say it over and over, and it's because it's something that I strongly believe in, Mr. Speaker. Right now, we need to be our brother's keeper because we are all in this fight together. We have to listen to the rules and regulations and follow them to the T, Mr. Speaker. We have to listen to our security forces when they tell us stay inside and stay safe, Mr. Speaker. They're not doing it because they want to be harsh. They're doing it because they want to ensure that the health of this country remains strong, Mr. Speaker. And we have to all agree that as long as we can all work together, we will be able to achieve what they're trying to achieve, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's not time for politics right now. All we need right now is just action. No talking, no long speeches, just action, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we'll be able to come over this together, Mr. Speaker. And as some people say, we're not looking at it as a lockdown. We're looking at it as a way of staying home to stay safe, Mr. Speaker. Use the opportunity to spend time with your family, to check upon loved ones, to do things that you may not have been able to do within your busy of life, Mr. Speaker. As the Senator said earlier, we are a resilient people. We are resilient from day one, Mr. Speaker. And we will continue to be resilient, Mr. Speaker, as long as we all understand that we are in this together, and together we will be overcome. We will overcome, Mr. Speaker. There's a new norm that is being created the world over, and we just have to prepare ourselves for the new norm. And so whether this said in 12 months, in 6 weeks, in 3 months, it's for our protection, Mr. Speaker, and it's constitutionally bound, Mr. Speaker. And so there should be no argument about what it is that it's trying to accomplish, because we all know what it's trying to achieve, and it's backed by the Constitution. I'll read it again. A resolution of the National Assembly or the Nevis Island Assembly passed for the purposes of this section shall remain in force for 12 months or such shorter period as may be specified. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Senator Akila Bayo Nisbet. Honorable Leader, Government Business. Do we do the lunch now? It's 1 o'clock. I'm sorry? Okay, yes. Okay, I recognize the honorable member for St. Christopher II, Marcella Liebert.
Mr. Speaker, I would just put it, in my view, into context as to why we are here today and how we got here today. There's a pandemic worldwide that's affecting all of the countries in the world, including St. Kitts and Nevis. And so we all have to take action to try and protect ourselves and our citizens so that we can have continued good health, which in turn would help us to begin to restore our economy. But there's a saying, Mr. Speaker, that when you're in good times, everybody seems to be a good leader. But when you have challenging times, that is when you really see what real and true leadership is all about. So, we are all leaders over here. I don't know about you. We are all leaders. Mr. Speaker, and what we have seen is how this government has mishandled from the start this COVID-19. Mishandled. And I'll point it out. Unprepared, gloating about being the model, the role model for the Caribbean, making false claims about international agencies like PAHO, making false claims just for politics. That is how this has been handled for the most part. Mr. Speaker, I think it's early in March, probably the first or second week of March. The Chamber of Industry and Commerce wanted a meeting with the government to deal with this coming pandemic. The Minister of Labour, member for Nevis 10, attended the meeting. He had absolutely no plan and nothing to present from the government. Up to that time, Mr. Speaker, not even a draft plan was in place to be able to have this discussion with the Chamber. They took nobody from the Ministry of Health to the meeting. A pandemic, a health crisis. So anything that they would want to know about health in that meeting could not have been discussed. Mr. Speaker, the Chamber took their own decisions. And so they laid off a lot of workers. And so we have workers right now in this country today, Mr. Speaker, who have been out of work for 4 and 5 weeks. To date, 4 and 5 weeks out of work. And up to now, not a penny. Not a penny. And we hear all the time the boast about surpluses and surpluses and surpluses. But up to today, not a cent in the hands of the workers. And so I say, we were unprepared, not ready, no foresight, and no plan. And so when you hear that businesses could get 8% off if they kept 75% of their workers, you have to laugh. Because why wasn't this told to them at that time? It might have helped. But you come 2 and 3 weeks after that to make a statement about businesses could get 8% off their income tax, the business tax, if they keep 75% of the workers, when the workers don't go home. Workers don't go home. So what were they going to do? We call them at that time, Mr. Speaker? We make a joke. Make a joke, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people were calling for the borders to be closed earlier. Calling for the borders to be closed earlier. Fell on deaf ears. Fell on deaf ears. Waited until we had cases, confirmed cases, in order to close the borders. Totally unprepared, Mr. Speaker. Totally unprepared. Mr. Speaker, the Tuesday of the stimulus package, the so-called stimulus package, because of course there's nothing stimulating about it, but the so-called stimulus package, the Tuesday, a big song and dance, as usual, and people tired talk and talk. People tired of the talk. When you hear people all the time, they're tired of the talk. They're tired of the talk. That, yeah, I could fix my teaching, but you can't fix the misappropriation. Not that. The misappropriation that you do of your clients' funds, you can't fix that. Okay, well, let him know that. Mr. Speaker, I was saying to you, nice, a light moment, isn't it? Light moment. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I want to say to you that we have had a failure of good and effective crisis communication. There's no transparency, and people don't believe. Every day we have in these briefings should have been left up to the professionals. Let me take out this so you can see my teeth. It should have been left up to the professionals, Mr. Speaker, in order to bring these briefings. Instead, every day, one song and dance going on there with pure politics, putting politics before the people's health. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Joe presented 19 kits, test kits, antibodies, 19 kits. And what? The junior minister get up in a briefing. Oh, Dr. Ju presented 19, made a small presentation, she's emphasizing small presentation of 19 kits, but they couldn't use them because they were in Mandarin. Well, I hope the masks from the Taiwanese weren't in Mandarin, Mr. Speaker. Petty politics. Petty politics, Mr. Speaker. But you had one Alex Nisbet and one Dr. Redmond who they say presented some antibody kits as well. And they accepted them. And you don't hear none of the junior minister or no minister making any comment about those kits. But they come on to try to see if they could play politics with these briefings that they say they're having, putting politics over the people's health. And Mr. Speaker, the junior minister, sad to say, she has a history of misleading the country. And so people don't have any confidence in her and what she says. And this pandemic situation, the same thing is happening. The same thing. Leave it to the professionals. Leave it to the professionals who are there. Same thing. We are probably the only country who have cases that we call import-related. That's nowhere in Paho, nowhere in Carrefour, import related, only in St. Kitts and Nevis, spinning everything. Can't trust them. She comes back. Oh, we have some local spread in a house. Local spread in a household, Mr. Speaker, kind to one fellow. The house must be in the sky. The house got to be in the sky. How can people have any faith and trust in what is being said at these briefings? Local spread in a house. And that's what we're saying. Leave it to the professionals. Because it's pure politics that they're playing when these briefings are on. And when you look at it, the member for number 7, he's a classic non-leader. He will never go out there to announce any of those confirmed cases. Not him. He will be hiding. And I don't even know where the Minister of Health is. I don't know where the Minister of Health is. Because all throughout this session, Mr. Speaker, all throughout this session, nobody could find the Minister of Health. Yes, she is the Minister of Health. I thought she was junior. But the Senior Minister of Health is absent. Just give out garbage pan. Absent, Mr. Speaker, in a health crisis. No, I want it soon. In a health crisis, Mr. Speaker. Health crisis, Mr. Speaker. We can't find the Minister of Health, probably the only country in the world, where the Minister of Health is absent from all parts and all forms of this pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Well, if you can leave it to professionals, why put the junior Minister of Health where you know nothing about science? Leave it to the professionals. So, Mr. Speaker, we have a situation here where the failure to communicate effectively and transparency is absolutely in vogue here. Mr. Speaker, we were told that the tests from CARFO, it takes 4 to 5 days for them to come back. We were told so in one of the briefings. We heard CARFO themselves saying it takes 24 to 48 hours. So who must believe? Who must we believe, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, let the member be unhelpful unintentionally, and let's help her. Because I know with so much information out there, we can get bogged down. The reality to which she speaks, in fact, exists. One, when we started, CARFA was unable to respond in a quick time in relation to tests. CARFA itself, because this was a pandemic that kept evolving over time, had put a restriction after we are seeing country after country after country being infected. Listen, I will only do X number of tests for any country because it was not humanly possible at that time. I think the figure they said was 20 that they would be able to do for a particular time period because it was overwhelming. Nobody was prepared for it. Not CARFA at that magnitude, not the CDC in America, not in Italy, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, what happened recently, why this is strange, recently what has happened, we have now got the RSS plane to begin to go from country to country to pick up the samples, and so we are able to get a quicker turnaround. So there is no misinformation. The two realities are the facts of life. When you started, the institution designated by PAHO and WHO could not keep up with the number of tests that were being put upon it. Therefore, establish a threshold of tests they would be able to produce. As we get more knowledge, as we recognize the imperative we were able to get a new mechanism that avoid you having to send these things to other media and to CAFA. And what we have done is to get the RSS to lend us the plane to go, as it were, on demand from state to state to get them there more quickly. So the two facts exist and they are not in contradiction. Right. When you started, it was overwhelming. You could only do so much. You set a threshold. Yes? Including condition that only person who had symptoms, you would pursue those tests. Then, as new resources come, new information come, we find a mechanism that assisted in better delivery in a more timely way. And so CAPA is now in a better position to respond. Thanks to the intervention of the Ministers of Health, of which the learned senator is an important member. That is the reality. That is reality, so there is no need for misinformation. No need for misinformation. You can check it.
And so, as I continue, Mr. Speaker, despite that interruption, I would say, Mr. Speaker, we heard from the junior minister that they sent out 12 cases one day, and the next day, the results were back. But when you look, 33 pending. So the people want an explanation. You send out what? You must have had something special about those cases. The public needs to know. It's a public information. And that's one of the things that Powell said. People must know. There must be information. Instead of that, the hiding, the lack of transparency. You sent out 12 cases yesterday. They come back today, but you got 33 pending. What happened to the 33 that's pending? What's happened to them? What's happened to them, Mr. Speaker? Again, they always believe that people are not listening and that people are foolish. The amount of misinformation and deliberate spin that's put out there just for politics, Mr. Speaker, mixing up the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, as I said, during this time, you always would see who true leaders are. You don't have to look too far to get an example of lack of leadership. Mr. Speaker, a member for number 7 went up to the camp. All they say is, we're going to test your temperature with something that's standing off like a gun. He refused to be tested, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I was never approached at the camp for testing. Never was. Never was. I don't know what you get that. Nobody spoke to me and pointed no gun at me. I mean, even the protocol of that, Mr. Speaker, would be so offensive that the Prime Minister, Minister of National Security, goes up to camp and somebody at the gate point a gun at the Prime Minister and say, come, I take a pressure. That could happen in any normal functioning society. Even if the Prime Minister was to be tested, he will have to be a senior person to engage the Prime Minister. There's a norm. It's the same way if you are to travel. Mr. Speaker, there are certain courtesies and protocol, and something like that cannot happen in the normal case of things. But that is a falsehood. There were incidents, but not incidents involving me, and nobody point their gun at me, Mr. Speaker. None of that. None of that.
Mr. Speaker,
that is politics.
The member for number 7 went up to the camp. He was going to ZIZ. Yes. The persons at the guard house that let people in, they have specific instructions to ensure that everybody who is passing through the gate, they have no exceptions. Everybody who is passing through the gate must have their temperature checked. He went with his bodyguard, sorry, the member for number 7, accompanied by his bodyguards.
Mr. Speaker, further, the protocol at the Defense Force is that any person who is to come to there, their names have to be at the guard post. And the appropriate protocol has to be in place. Has to be in place. That is a security institution. You can't just go up there. They have to have your name. And the officers there know. And they know the protocol. And they know what they can do and what they ought not to do. That is the reality. When you want to make politics, understand the rules. You were there, you were pulled over in a line in America, so you understand.
Mr. Speaker, as leader, you would have thought, leader of the country, you would have led by example and follow what the persons are saying, because those were the instructions. But no, he had to say, you know who I am?
Mr. Speaker, again, I'm going to ask the honourable member for number 2 to withdraw that statement. I had no engagement with any officer. I asked no one if they know who I am. Because everyone up there must know who is the Prime Minister of the country. And every Defense Force officer must know the Minister of National Security. There is no need for me to say that to any of them. They can't be operating there, Mr. Speaker. And if we come here to deal with a serious pandemic, and the best that the member for number 2 can do is to get on some hearsay, some chalala, which has no important relevance in the context of the war against the pandemic. We could see why no leader of the opposition can emerge for today's sitting of the parliament. This is making a mockery of her time that has already been determined. Making a mockery of time, but engaging in a fantasy of irrelevance when serious problems confront the country.
Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, he refused to get the test, and now we have an officer charged, Mr. Speaker, out of the matter, charged because the lack of leadership. Do as I say, but not as I do. And we are saying that in these times, you need true leaders who will lead by example, especially in this pandemic time. Mr. Speaker, we're in a lockdown. But you see pictures of the Deputy Prime Minister during the lockdown. And the Prime Minister and some other people living, having fun, breaching the social distancing that they're preaching to the public. Breaching it, Mr. Speaker. And then we're talking about leadership. Lead by example. That's what the people out there saying. That's what they're saying. And so, Mr. Speaker, Next Gen SKN had to show that we care for the people, that we have foresight, that we know that in times like this, they would need someone or some group to really care for them. And so we launched our Next Gen initiative and took out care packages and gave out in 2 rounds over 2,000 care packages. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? When we were giving out at the end of the first round, at a briefing, as usual, the political briefing, the Attorney General gets up talking about how we out there giving out care packages. Mark you, we sat and obtained the permission of the Commissioner of Police, who I understand was dragged over the coals for giving us the permission to carry out those packages. And so the Attorney General, in spite of that, came in a briefing and sought to play politics in the briefing, as they do with nearly all the briefings, to say, warning us that we are not supposed to do that. We must give them to NEMA, Mr. Speaker. Give them to NEMA to give out. And threatened us with being locked up, he said, the Attorney General. But the very same day, the member for Nevis 9 was doing the exact same thing in Nevis. I don't know if he works for NEMA. And I don't know if the AG was also sending a message to him about being locked up. But worse than that, Mr. Speaker, worse than that, after we had given out 2 rounds, and the people of the country saying, where the government? Look how we're suffering. Where the government? It's so they're scrambling, if you want to see them. Scrambling. I'm glad to get out some, you know. I'm really happy to get out some, because people really hungry, eh? People really in need. Scrambling. We went out in days when there were partial lockdown, when you had time to go out. So did the member for Nevis 9. But the member for St. Christopher 5 and the member for St. Christopher 4 out there on lockdown days, total lockdown days, scrambling to give out packages in reaction to our care initiative. And the member for number 7, I understand he took also the caretaker for number 3, round giving out cooked food on lockdown days, Mr. Speaker. People out there on lockdown days giving out food, cooked food, Mr. Speaker, PLP operatives
Mr. Speaker,
on the street.
again, I am so busy looking after the people's business, ensuring that the country is safe. I have not had the time to go around in number 3 and elsewhere giving out hot food, Mr. Speaker. I wish everyone well, Mr. Speaker, but the member for number 2 must use the time more appropriately than to engage this kind of nigger house. You know what I mean? It's really unbecoming. But I leave the case, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps she will atone her behavior at this time. This is a crisis, member for number 2.
What I'm saying is, what I'm saying must be really hot in your bad kind and get about 10 times, you got more to get up. So it probably get into you very much. And so, Mr. Speaker, one set of rules for us. Even want to lock us up, but a different set for those over there. Mr. Speaker, no leadership. Even when the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Sports was saying on the advice of the Ministry of Health, they're canceling sports meets, primary school championships, high school championships, because of the COVID-19 and the social distancing and all of the protocols. The government was still having town halls. The government was still having town halls, breaching the very rules that they said they're setting for the public. What kind of leadership is that, Mr. Speaker? The same health people in the meetings. While on the radio, that's why you can't believe what they're saying, you know. They're talking about, oh, because of these protocols, we're canceling these sports events, which should have been cancelled, Mr. Speaker. Should have been. But how is it that the government is still engaging in breaching the very protocols that they're asking the public to comply with? That is what we're talking about, Mr. Speaker. The hypocrisy. The fact that you can't take nothing they say because they say one thing and do something completely different, as you see with the taking of the temperature. And so, Mr. Speaker, one of the other ways in which this pandemic has been totally mishandled is that there's been no involvement of the opposition. This is probably the only country in the world. No matter how much whole of society and so on, you hear them saying all the time, whole of society, whole of society. Just words. In truth and in fact, no involvement of the opposition. They have not, and we have offered and offered and offered, thank you, and still offering, because we believe Barbados sent to all the parties, all. Antigua sent to all the parties, all the political parties, all. Just like how you sent to all social groupings, all the political parties. But not here, because they're playing politics with the pandemic, a serious matter like that. And they want to put politics in it before the people's health. And so the opposition continues to be excluded from any consultation and any committee to deal with this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, if the opposition were involved, they might have a stimulus package, not this. They might have a stimulus package because this thing here is certainly not well thought out. It's make up as you go. And that has been one of the main traits of this government for the 5 years, so it's nothing new. Make up as you go. You start off saying, oh, the stimulus is for these set of workers. And then busmen come and say something, and say, okay, busmen too. And then maybe another group come and say something, and say, okay, those too. Not well thought out. Probably mishandled. Because there are many groups of workers who are outside the loop, Mr. Speaker. Because this pandemic, as you know, has a multiplier effect. It has a multiplier effect. So even though those who work in the hotel industry, in hospitality and so on, were directly affected, it's a multiplier effect. Landlords can't get the rent because these people here can't pay rent. Other business people can't make no money because the country on lockdown. You know how much small business people come crying to me? They got a rent to pay. They got a mortgage to pay. Nobody is considering them. The private preschool owners can't open because the children they may in there. Well, of course, but somebody who is in government must try and find a way to help them. Help them. Don't let them suffer. People are suffering. People are in pain. And this government is just talking. Every day, talking. People tired of the talk. They want to be able to see some form of action. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I hope that when they're paying this $1,000 or whatever they say they're paying, that it will also be paid for the month of March. I hope it's not just from April because, like the bill, they ain't saying when it starts. Look what you see. They ain't saying when it starts because there's a smartness in it. But there are people out there who lost their jobs since the first week in March. The first week in March. And so March must be considered. So for those who have ears to hear, the people are suffering. They have no money since the first week in March. Some of them 4 and 5 weeks out of the jobs. Consider March. And as for the $1,000, you hear them talking about the $1,000. They need to properly explain it to the people. $1,000. But if for some reason you want to reduce hours, or you're getting some stipend in some other way, that takes you up to $700 a month. You only getting $300. You only getting $300, you ain't getting $1,000. So let them explain to people. I hear what he's saying.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to respond and maybe clarify what the honorable member is, Mr. to a claim that people don't understand what the payment of the income support is and how it will work. Mr. Speaker, we have made it very clear that this is not a replacement of people's earnings.
And it could never be.
It is an effort by the government through Social Security to provide an income support so that persons who, one, would have been laid off, and we didn't specify the hotel industry, we talked of people who would have been laid off. So if a person is laid off, they'll get an income support of $1,000. That is if they're making no income. That's the maximum. If someone has reduced hours or has some other means of income, then if that falls below the 1,000, which is the maximum, those persons or that person will get the difference between what they earn and the $1,000. I don't know if that is so difficult for anyone to understand. I think it is a reasonable approach by the government and Social Security to assist people in a time of hardship. That is all we are doing, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for helping me to make the point that I'm making. That is, that if you're getting some money from reduced hours and you're getting $700, you're only getting $300. So I don't know what the point of order was about, because he said the same thing I was saying. And if you're getting, no, people don't understand it, so I'm explaining it to them. And they understand it in figures, not the makeup, the difference and all them story. Give them the figures, so that if the stipend or whatever they get at the end of the month comes to $1,000, they get nothing. They get nothing.
Speaker, we went through that when we made that statement some weeks ago. And I remember specifically when there was this fake news about people going to Social Security.
Labour put it out to imperil.
I spoke to the press and gave a statement which indicated the same thing. The maximum is $1,000, but if someone were to be earning, and I think I said $400 for reduced hours, they would be made up with the $600 to make the $1,000. That was said, and it's being repeated time and time again. So what the member is saying clearly is a nonsense in respect of what the government has been seeking to do and explain to the people.
Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, if at the end of the month what you get is $1,000, you will get nothing. And people need to understand that. So what you have, Mr. Speaker, is a situation where someone would have been making, say, $2,000 before a month. They lost their job, and now they're getting $1,000 to provide for their families. That is what this government is saying. And that is reasonable, they say. When you're gone from a little $2,000 a month to $1,000, and that is reasonable. And we're saying, Mr. Speaker, they should have involved the opposition, because we have some next-gen ideas that could help them. For example, like child benefit. Because when you have single mothers and single parents, apart from the $1,000, they should even have access to some sort of child benefit. Because somebody, please, sit down, man, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down.
Income assistance from Social Security is what we are talking about for the $1,000. But there are other avenues of assistance.
Like?
The same thing you're talking about,
Like?
going to the community affairs and to the PAP. That's all been explained over and over again. Social Security is only one area of providing assistance. There are other areas which are operated or provided through the government, through the social and operate, yes, all there.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. They bring a point which is
Yeah,
not necessary.
the half an hour that we had agreed to has expired, including, I've taken into consideration the interruptions, so you've had an additional 8 or so minutes, but we had agreed on 5 minutes.
And so, Mr. Speaker, last choice of leadership is we're not only failing in leadership nationally, but regionally. Mr. Speaker, do you know who is the lead spokesman on health for CARICOM? Do you know? The member for number 7. The member for number 7, hiding from the meetings, not attending the meetings. First time he sent the deputy, sit down in the meeting, well, it's virtual, but there, said absolutely nothing. The next time he sent the member for Nevis 10. How can you be leading from behind? This is the lead spokesman on health. And they're having COVID, you know. They said it's a pandemic, serious business. And the lead spokesman on health absent from the meetings. Absent. That is the level of leadership that is happening with the member from number 7. And Mr. Speaker, I want to end by supporting what my colleague said and to say to the country, do not be fooled by this 12-month period that they're trying to get in here. I agree with member for number 3 about the interpretation. You'd notice that in the resolution, it says emergency up to a period of 12 months. There's not up to in the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. There's not up to in the Constitution. The Constitution said 12 months or not up to 12 months. Not up to 12 months or. So it's specific. But it's a trick they're trying. It's a trick. But I want the people of the country to know, why is it that this government would want to have some discretion on the limitation of people's rights? Because when you have a state of emergency, that's what happens. You limit people's rights, the freedom of movement, and so on. Why you want to have 12 months of discretion on that? To manipulate people's freedom of movement and powers of arrest. Why you want that, Mr. Speaker? And, Mr. Speaker, there's some set dates in the Constitution. One would end on the 14th of May. Come what may, no matter how much months they say they're giving themselves authority for. Come the 14th of May, the House must dissolve. Emergency or no emergency. And come the 11th of August, we must have those elections. We must have those elections. So all who want to stay in power after that, all who want to stay in power after that, the people of this country must know, we don't want no despots running the country. Because people know that it's in times like these when governments have authority to restrict your rights that the despots show themselves. And what we're seeing here today is a despotic act to try to give themselves authority for 12 months past the 14th of May and past the 11th of August when the elections are due. But let them know that by the 11th of August, this country must go to the polls. They're weighing in the balance and they are found wanting. And they're trying it everywhere to extend the time and the power. Not this time, brother. Not this time. Not this time. So the people of the country must understand that. We must not allow them to come in here and try to extend their authority past a time that the Constitution does not give them. Who can support that? Who can support that, Mr. Speaker? And so we say, not today. Come the 14th of May, and now you ain't sleeping, the House can dissolve. If you ain't dissolve it before that. But by the time we had to dissolve, and come the 11th of August, you got to call the election. What South Korea? They got a pandemic too. They have a pandemic, but they hold the elections. Pandemic does not erode democracy. Pandemic does not erode democracy. But you guys, Anguilla is a different kettle of fish. We have a constitution that we must abide by. Anguilla go according to Britain. So, a constitution that we must abide by, so don't come in here to give people the impression that you can go past the 11th of August, because you can't. You can't go past the 11th of August. So, you can't go past the 11th of August. And so I say that this is a trick. And you notice, I took a dim view of the fact that 3 days ago, we got a notice. But only when we come in here, we could get the resolution, and we had to debate it. When they had the resolution all along, they had it all along. But we must get it when we come. And then the junior minister works because Congress put it on the internet. Because they want nobody know what they're in here doing. They want nobody know that they're trying to extend this thing for 12 months. They don't want nobody to know that. So that is why you see, only give us when they come in, hiding up everything like how they hide the IMF report. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I would not support this diabolical act to try to give this government authority to go. Why you want to pass something that would put you past the time the Constitution says you must be there? Why you want to do that? So, Mr. Speaker, I would not support this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Honourable Member for St. Christopher 2, Marcella Liebert. We'll break for the luncheon, and so this Honourable House stands adjourned until 2:45, 1 hour, 3 o'clock. I'm open 2:45. Until this Honourable House stands adjourned until 2:45 this afternoon.
The microphones so you guys can start our conversation and update the public.
Yes, please. Morning, GQ. Morning to everyone out there in the listening audience, both local, regionally, and on the internet. I want to say good morning to everybody. Yes, as you indicated, GQ, because of the curfew period, we policing with you will be consistent with myself and Superintendent Henry, because to continuously feed the general public with information and address the questions that they have. So I have in the studio with me Superintendent Henry, Divisional A Commander. Welcome, Superintendent.
Thank you, Inspector. I'm happy to be here as usual.
Yes, please. And last night, the Honorable Prime Minister addressed the public with reference to Zone 1, Zone 2, and what is going forward. Superintendent Henry would now elaborate on that aspect and more. Okay. Superintendent.
Okay, thank you, Inspector, and good morning, GQ, and good morning to your listeners. As the Inspector would have mentioned, the Honorable Prime Minister would have made an announcement last night about what should happen today and next week. And so we would use this morning's program to elaborate further and explain further to the public, make it simpler, make it easier to understand, so that all the misconceptions and the misunderstandings that persons may have, we could seek to have them cleared up this morning. I would first begin by addressing the state of emergency. I think the Prime Minister would have mentioned that the current state of emergency comes to an end on Saturday, and that we will go into another 7-day period from Saturday coming. As I would have mentioned last week, the Governor General has approved state of emergency for up to the 18th. I think it started on the 7th of March, of April, the 7th and 9th of April, and that runs until the 18th. That is Saturday coming.
21 days.
Well, that would have been 14 days. There were 7 days. There were 14 days prior to that. We had 14 days prior to that last one. So that this additional 7 days now brings us to 21 days.
Okay.
Now, at the end of these 21 days, Parliament would have to do any extension. The Prime Minister mentioned that there will be an emergency sitting of Parliament on Friday, the 17th. And so that I assume that a resolution would pass at that time to extend the state of emergency beyond the 18th.
And the policies.
Right, and new regulations will come out then, because the current regulations expires on the 18th as well. So the state of emergency comes to an end on the 18th, and the regulations also expires on the 18th. So Parliament would now sit tomorrow. They would make new regulations. They would extend the state of emergency, and new regulations will follow to guide that new state of emergency. So we are in still in the state of emergency, and we are now in the stage of the partial curfew days under the old regulations, under the existing regulations, so that today and tomorrow persons can be up and about between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. Now, in order to reduce the number of persons coming into Bastia, the country has been divided into zones, 4 zones, 2 in St. Kitts and 2 in Nevis. The zone in St. Kitts is Zone 1 and 2. Zone 1 extends from the Southeast Peninsula towards Bastia as far as 4th Street, go up to the roundabout at Taylor's, across the F.T. Williams Highway, along the Island Main Road to as far as Lavington.
Right.
So from Lavington to Bastia, including East Bastia, Southeast Peninsula, Frigate Bay, that would be Zone 1.
Gotcha.
Zone 2 would be the other half. So from 4th Street, going westwards to Lavington, to Parsons, that is,
Yes.
including St. Peter's, would be Zone 2. So Central Bastia, West Bastia, and St. Peter's, all the way around the island to Parsons Village would be Zone 2.
Okay.
Now, Zone 1 are permitted to come to Bastia today to conduct essential business. Banking, money, financial services, medical, food.
Right.
Those businesses would be in operation today. Now, what is expected of Zone 2, we expect that you would remain in your zone, remain in place, do not come into Bastia. The whole intention of having the island zone is to reduce the crowding in Bastia. Remember, this disease spread by contact, persons coming into contact with each other. And so if we have too many persons in a small space, the contact will be unavoidable. And so to reduce the numbers, the zoning has been implemented. So we ask that persons who live in Zone 2 do not come into Bastille. We have given you the opportunity to replenish your supplies in your district. If you live in Oldwood, for example, and you need to get some flour or some sugar, you could run down to a supermarket in Oldwood or a shop in Oldwood and get those things. We have made it possible over the last 2 days of the 24-hour curfew for the small shops and supermarkets in the rural areas to come to the wholesalers in Bastille and replenish their supplies. So we expect that the shops them should be well stocked and be able to supply the basic needs for persons who live in the rural areas. So we ask persons remain in your zones, particularly those in the rural areas, and utilize the services in your district. There are clinics that will be open. There are some doctor offices in those areas. Utilize those services until your turn tomorrow, when you can come into Bastille. If you have to. Now, having said that, the Prime Minister also announced that as of next week, there would be 4 additional partial curfew days, so that persons need not rush today and tomorrow